real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
The Merciful Monster. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I once had a series of encounters with a dogman that I admit were terrifying, but I also have to admit were life-saving. It happened when I was hiking and hurt my ankle many years ago in the early 1980s, back when I was still a young man. The first time I saw the dogman, twilight was settling into the forest like a heavy blanket. 3 days I'd been stranded with my useless ankle, hunger gnawing at my insides, hope dwindling with each passing hour. The rustle came from the western ridge, deliberate movement, too rhythmic for wind, too heavy for deer. I remember freezing, my breath caught painfully in my chest. Between two towering hemlocks, something emerged that defied categorization. It walked upright like a man, but stood nearly 7 feet tall, its powerful form covered in dark russet fur that shimmered with hints of silver in the fading light. The head was unmistakably canine. Elongated snout, pointed ears alert and swiveling independently like radar dishes tracking every forest sound. Those eyes, though, intelligent, assessing. That's what paralyzed me more than fear. They weren't like animal eyes, vacant and instinctual. Something looked out from behind them, something that recognized another thinking being when it saw one. I had no weapon. I couldn't run. I couldn't fight. My heart hammered so violently I was certain the creature could hear it. We watched each other for what felt like eternity, this impossible being and I, locked in mutual assessment. When it took a step toward me, muscles rippling beneath that dense fur, I closed my eyes and waited for teeth, for claws. I waited for the end. Instead, I heard a soft woofing sound, almost gentle. When I dared look again, the creature had settled on its haunches at a respectful distance, head tilted in what I can only describe as curiosity. In its massive paw-like hand, it held something, a collection of dark, plump berries, glistening with natural sugar. With deliberate slowness, the dogman extended its arm, offering the foraged fruit. Time suspended as I weighed my options, potential poison from an unknown creature versus certain starvation. Something in those amber eyes, a depth of intelligence, perhaps even compassion, made my decision for me. My trembling hand reached out. The berries burst with tartness and sweetness against my parched tongue. Energy flooded my depleted system almost immediately. The creature watched me eat with what I could only interpret as satisfaction. And then it placed the remaining berries on a flat stone beside me before backing away. Just before disappearing into the gathering darkness, it made a sound. Not quite a bark, not quite language, and gestured toward my injured ankle. Then it was gone, melting into the forest with impossible silence for something so large. Well, I didn't sleep that night, eyes straining against the darkness, equal parts hoping for and dreading another appearance. By morning I convinced myself that I must have hallucinated the entire encounter, until I spotted fresh tracks in the soft earth, and a new pile of berries beside my makeshift shelter. My journey to that mountainside began innocently enough. Spring of 1982 had been particularly brutal for the surveying department. Budget cuts meant twice the workload with half the staff, and boundary disputes in the newly developed lake region had consumed my waking hours for months. By June, exhaustion had hollowed me out entirely. Take a week off, my supervisor had insisted, not out of compassion, but pragmatism. He told me I was making mistakes, and we can't afford errors in our line of work. My first day off unfolded perfectly. June's sunshine filtered through the dense canopy, dappling the forest floor with shifting patterns of light. Birdsong accompanied me wherever I went, and twice I spotted white-tailed deer, watching cautiously before bounding away. If I had known what awaited me the following day, would I have turned back? It's impossible to say. What I do know is that as I zipped myself into my sleeping bag that night, watching stars appear between swaying pine boughs, I felt something approaching contentment for the first time since Margaret's passing. When dawn came, I broke camp efficiently, eager to reach the summit of Falconer's Ridge by midday. The trail steepened as morning progressed, challenging my legs and lungs in a way my sedentary office life hadn't prepared me for. Still, each gasping breath felt cleansing, each burning muscle a reminder that I was gloriously alive. It's strange how catastrophe arrives, not with dramatic thunder or foreboding, but with something as mundane as loose gravel on a narrow switchback. I had just rounded a particularly tight bend when it happened. My left boot landed on what appeared to be solid ground, but was actually a deceptive layer of pebbles over smooth stone. Physics took over with cruel efficiency, foot sliding outward, weight shifting unexpectedly, balance compromised. My hiking pole clattered against rock as I instinctively reached for anything to arrest my momentum. I didn't fall that far, really, perhaps 5 or 6 feet down the embankment, before a sturdy rhododendron thicket caught me. Had I tumbled the full distance to the rocks below, well, I wouldn't be telling you this story decades later. For several minutes I simply lay there, the world spinning in nauseating circles above me. When consciousness fully returned, my first instinct was professional assessment. No head trauma, arms and torso intact, no visible bone protrusion from the ankle, just extraordinary consuming pain, radiating from foot to knee. I called out help, my voice sounding thin and insubstantial against the vastness of the wilderness. But nobody answered. The indifferent rustle of leaves, a distant woodpecker's percussion, the soft whisper of wind through pine needles. The trail I'd been following wasn't heavily trafficked even during peak season. By mid-June, on a weekday, the chances of another hiker happening upon me were increasingly small. My pack had landed several feet away, its contents partially spilled against the underbrush. The first aid kit had tumbled out, its contents scattered like confetti among fallen leaves. With agonizing care, I attempted to move toward my supplies. Even the slightest shift sent lightning bolts of pain shooting up my leg. My ankle had already swollen to twice its normal size, the skin pulling tight and shiny. Not broken, perhaps, but severely sprained at minimum. Whatever the technical diagnosis, the practical reality remained the same. I wasn't going to be able to walk. As afternoon sunlight slanted through the trees, I managed to drag myself and essential supplies into a relatively sheltered position against the hillside. Using my knife, I cut away my boot with careful precision, revealing the angry purple-blue landscape of damaged tissue beneath. I applied cold compresses from my first aid kit, wrapping the ankle tightly with bandages, and I elevated it on my folded jacket. Then, I waited, and I hoped, and I watched the sun begin its inexorable descent toward the western horizon. Darkness in the wilderness is entirely different than darkness in civilization. It has texture, presence. It has intention. As twilight deepened into true night, I faced this ancient darkness with the acute vulnerability of an injured animal. I had fashioned the rudimentary lean-to using my emergency tarp, some fallen branches, and cord from my pack. Every movement required careful calculation, how to shift weight, how to reach necessary items, how to avoid jarring my throbbing ankle. Eventually I fell asleep, and then I jolted awake to a distinct sensation of being watched. The nearly full moon had risen, casting silver-blue illumination through the trees. I scanned my surroundings, heart racing, seeing nothing but shadows and moonlight-dappled foliage. Yet the feeling persisted, that prickling awareness of observation that triggers deep evolutionary alarm systems in the human brain. I called out asking if anyone was there, but only forest sounds answered. Still the sensation remained. Whether from pain, fear, or genuine presence, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes upon me. I reached for my hiking pole, a poor weapon but better than nothing, and I clutched it across my chest. When first light finally arrived, it revealed a landscape transformed by morning mist, ethereal, beautiful, and utterly indifferent to my plight. It was during this bleak assessment that I first noticed them. Dark, glistening berries scattered near the edge of my shelter. Perfectly ripe blackberries, arranged in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern, rather than a natural growth or accidental distribution. Those were berries that hadn't been there when darkness fell. They looked like tiny beacons of hope amid my desperation. My rational mind screamed warnings. They could be poisonous after all. They could have been dropped by animals. They could be hallucinations born of pain and hunger. Yet my trembling fingers reached for them anyway, driven by a primal need for nourishment. They burst against my tongue with surprising sweetness, their juice momentarily erasing the parched feeling in my throat. I ate them with satisfaction, savoring each one, wondering through my fog of exhaustion who or what might have left them. The answer came as morning mist began lifting from the valley below. A rustling sound drew my attention to the thicket beyond my makeshift shelter. At first I saw nothing but swaying branches and dancing shadows. But then, the shadows shifted, coalesced, took form. I'll never forget that first clear daylight sighting, how the creature moved with paradoxical grace, powerful muscles flowing beneath russet fur that reflected the morning light, standing upright like a man but unmistakably other. The canine head swiveled toward me, amber eyes locking with mine across the clearing. I nearly died. The stories whispered among local hunters, the campfire tales I had dismissed as superstition and folklore, the reported sightings I'd rationalized away as bears seen at odd angles or wolves magnified by fear. All these rushed through my mind as I beheld what could only be described as Dogman. Terror paralyzed me. Not the fleeting fear of a startling noise or unexpected sight, but bone-deep, primordial terror that turns marrow to ice. My mouth opened but produced no sound. My body, so focused on pain moments before, now hummed with adrenaline that had nowhere to go. The creature tilted its head, a gesture very canine, yet infused with an intelligence that transcended animal curiosity. It made a soft sound, not quite a growl but not quite a whine, then slowly lowered itself to all fours. In this position it approached with deliberate caution, pausing whenever I flinched. "Stay back," I finally managed, my voice a raspy whisper. To my astonishment, it stopped. Whether it was responding to my tone or to the words themselves, I couldn't say, but the compliance suggested comprehension beyond instinct. From perhaps 15 feet away, it studied me with unnerving intensity. I noticed details my panic had initially obscured, the silver streaking through the darker fur around its muzzle, the remarkably dexterous-looking paws that were more like hands with their curved claws, the way its chest expanded with breaths that seemed measured and controlled, rather than animal quick. And then, something extraordinary happened. The creature handed me more berries, the same variety I had just consumed. With exquisite slowness, it placed them on a flat stone, then backed away several paces as if making an offering. "You brought these?" I whispered, gesturing to the berries I'd already eaten. The creature made a soft huffing sound that might have been affirmation. 1,000 questions flooded my mind. What was this creature? As if sensing my internal conflict, the animal sat back on its haunches, creating a non-threatening posture despite its formidable size. It gestured toward my injured ankle with one of those unsettling hand paws, then made a series of motions that seemed to mimic applying something to the injury. When it rose again and retreated toward the forest edge, I felt an irrational urge to call it back. Instead, I watched in mute fascination as it disappeared among the trees, moving with surprising silence for a being of its size. Only after it vanished did the full weight of the encounter crash over me. I had just been interacting with something science claimed couldn't exist. Something that, rather than harming me in my vulnerable state, had apparently brought me food. Something that seemed to recognize my injury, and if I interpreted its gestures correctly, intended to return. I looked down at the fresh berries on the stone, tangible evidence that I had not imagined the encounter. With shaking hands, I gathered them into my bandana. Whatever happened next, I needed something to eat to survive. The wilderness around me suddenly felt different. Not less dangerous, perhaps, but less impersonal. As if behind its indifferent facade, unexpected compassion might dwell in forms I had never considered possible. True to what I had somehow intuited, the creature returned as afternoon shadows lengthened. This time it carried not just berries, but also what appeared to be herbs, dark green leaves bundled together with strips of bark. Moving with that same deliberate slowness, it approached my shelter and placed its offerings nearby. What followed was a form of communication unlike anything I had ever experienced. Through elaborate pantomime, the dogman indicated I should crush the leaves and apply the resulting paste to my ankle. It demonstrated the motions of grinding and then pointed repeatedly between the herbs and my injury. Trust doesn't come easily to a man of science, facing something beyond scientific explanation. Yet what choice did I have? My ankle had swollen further, angry red streaks suggesting possible infection. Modern medicine was miles away, across impassable terrain. These unfamiliar herbs represented my only option beyond suffering. With the dogman creature watching intently, I followed its instructions, mashing the leaves between stones until they formed a pungent green paste. The application brought an immediate cooling sensation to my inflamed joint. Whether genuine medicinal effect or merely psychological relief, I wasn't sure. The dogman made a sound that resembled satisfaction, then settled just beyond arm's reach, observing me with those uncannily intelligent eyes. Neither of us moved for several minutes, locked in mutual assessment. "Thank you," I finally said, the words feeling simultaneously inadequate and absurd. The creature's ears twitched forward at my voice. It extended one limb toward my canteen, making a tipping motion toward its mouth. "Water? You want some of my water?" Another of those huffing sounds that I was beginning to interpret as affirmation. I hesitated only briefly before sliding the canteen toward it. The dogman picked it up with surprising dexterity, examining the screw cap with what could only be described as intellectual curiosity. After several moments of inspection, it twisted correctly, raising the container to drink with mannerisms startlingly reminiscent of human behavior. After taking a modest sip, it recapped the canteen and returned it to me, an exchange that spoke volumes about its cognitive abilities. This was no mere animal acting on instinct, but a being capable of observation, deduction, and intentional communication. That evening established a pattern that would continue for the next 3 days. The creature would disappear for hours, then return with food, sometimes berries, sometimes other edible roots or even raw fish from a stream I could hear but not see from my position. Sometimes it brought back my canteen filled with fresh water. It brought fresh herbs for my ankle twice daily, and I noticed marked improvement after each application. We developed a rudimentary form of communication. Certain sounds from the dogman came to represent specific concepts: a sharp woof for danger, a low rumble for food, a peculiar chirping noise that seemed to be inquiry about my well-being. I spoke to it constantly, unsure how much language it was comprehending, but certain it recognized my emotional tones. On the second or third day, it helped me relocate to a more sheltered position as rain threatened, supporting my weight with surprising gentleness, despite claws that looked capable of rending flesh with minimal effort. The strength in its frame was astonishing. It handled my 180 pounds with no apparent strain. By the third day, I found myself looking forward to its return, the isolation and fear of my situation somewhat mitigated by these strange interactions. I began to notice patterns in its behavior, how it always circled our shared space before settling, how it oriented itself toward potential approaches, how its ears constantly tracked sounds I could barely perceive. It was, I realized, continually maintaining security, protecting not just itself, but me as well. There were moments when our differences dissolved into something approaching companionship. Once, as evening settled around us, the creature displayed what I can only describe as playfulness, fashioning a small pile of pine cones which it arranged and rearranged in patterns that seemed almost symbolic. Another time it brought a peculiar stone with crystal formations embedded within, offering it to me with what seemed like deliberate selection. On the fourth morning, I awoke to find a crude walking stick fashioned from a sturdy branch, the bark stripped away to create a smooth handle, placed precisely where I would see it upon waking. The message was unmistakable. It was time for me to attempt walking. With the dogman watching attentively, I leveraged myself upright, testing weight on my injured ankle. The herbal treatments had worked remarkably well. Pain remained, certainly, but the swelling had subsided significantly, and I could bear a modest weight without collapsing. After a while, I moved back to my own walking stick, and the creature didn't seem too offended. It made a chirping sound that I came to associate with inquiry, clearly asking about my status. I'm a little better, I told it, managing a smile that felt rusty on my face. Actually, I'm much better. For the first time since our strange partnership began, I saw what I could only interpret as satisfaction in those amber eyes. A connection across the vast evolutionary divide that separated us. He had joined us in this moment of shared purpose. By the 5th day, my ankle had strengthened enough for a cautious movement. The Dogman became my unlikely physical therapist, watching intently as I practiced standing and then taking small steps using the walking stick. When I'd stumble, he'd materialize in my side, a steady presence preventing falls. On the 7th morning, I awoke to find the Dogman sitting at the perimeter of our shared space, watching me with an intensity that communicated clear purpose. He gestured toward the trail, and then to me. "You think I'm ready to leave?" I asked. His affirming huff needed no translation. With his assistance, I gathered my essential supplies and prepared for the journey. My pack felt twice as heavy as it had before, but the Dogman shouldered it without hesitation, carrying my burden as he led me toward an alternative path, gentler than my original route, winding gradually downward toward civilization. At the edge of more frequented trails, he stopped abruptly. Placing my pack carefully on the ground, he backed away, amber eyes fixed on mine with unmistakable meaning. This was our goodbye. "Will I see you again?" I asked, emotion tightening my throat. He made no sound, but gestured toward the distant ridges before returning his gaze to me. Then, with a final huffing sound that seemed almost like farewell, he turned and vanished into the dense forest with that impossible silence. 43 years have passed since that extraordinary week in the mountains. I made it back to civilization, explained my absence with stories of getting lost, and kept most of my encounters secret. Who would believe an account of a Dogman with healing knowledge and unmistakable intelligence? Yet the experience transformed me. That week taught me that compassion transcends species, that help arrives in unexpected forms, and that the most profound connections often defy our limited understanding of what is possible. Sometimes, when the evening light filters through the trees just so, I imagine those amber eyes watching from the forest edge, and I smile, grateful for the merciful monster. John Carnagon, his legends long, the stories of him go on and on. Please join me in thanking our great channel member John Carnagon for once again making this episode possible. John has donated to us again using our super thanks button located under each of our YouTube videos. Thanks, John. As a channel member, he gets to see our weekly secret uncensored episodes, like the newest one we put out recently called I Fed My Cheating Husband to the Dogman. For more information about how you can help this channel stay online like the great John Carnagon, here's our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.